The reason you are losing strength after 60 is not what you think it is. It is not simply that you are getting older. It is not that your body has given up or that muscle loss is an unavoidable biological sentence that every person over 60 must serve. The real reasons why strength declines so dramatically in the decades after 60 are specific. They are measurable and they are almost never discussed honestly in the 15-minute medical appointments where most seniors receive their health guidance. And the most devastating part of this is not that the reasons are hidden or complicated. It is that most of the mistakes driving your strength loss are things you are doing right now today with the best intentions, following advice you were given years ago that the current science has either significantly revised or outright contradicted. Here is the research that I want you to understand before anything else in this video. A landmark study published in the Journal of Cachexia, Sarcopenia and Muscle, which is one of the leading research journals for muscle biology, in aging adults analyzed the dietary, behavioral, and lifestyle patterns of over 3,200 adults between the ages of 60 and 85 and identified the specific modifiable factors, meaning the things people were doing or not doing that they could change that most strongly predict ICT, the rate of muscle strength decline over a 5-year follow-up period. The researchers found that 4 specific addressable mistakes explained 67% of the variance in strength decline between participants. Not genetics, not age, not gender. 4 mistakes that people were making repeatedly, consistently, and unknowingly. 67% of the difference in how fast people lost strength came down to correctable behaviors. That is the most hopeful finding in all of aging muscle research, and almost no one is talking about it clearly enough. Before I walk you through all 5 of the biggest mistakes driving strength loss after 60, I want to give you a preview of mistake number 2, because it is the one that produces the most visceral reaction in my patients when I explain it, because it is something that virtually every health-conscious senior over 60 does deliberately and with genuine pride in their dietary discipline. When I show them the research on what this specific dietary habit is doing to their anabolic hormone levels and their muscle protein synthesis capacity, the response I most commonly get is a long silence, followed by the question, "Why has nobody ever told me this?" Keep watching, but first I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below right now and tell me 2 things. How old are you? And when did you first notice that your strength was declining? Was it sudden after an illness or a period of inactivity? Or has it been a slow, gradual erosion that you have been watching with increasing concern for years? Whatever your answer, I read every comment on this channel, and your experiences matter to me and to this community. Now let us count down from 5 to 1, from damaging to the single most important mistake driving strength loss in adults over 60. Mistake number 5. This first mistake is one that most people would never identify as a strength problem, because on the surface it appears to be simply a reasonable approach to eating in your later years. But the physiological consequences for aging muscle tissue are so significant and so well documented that I consider it one of the most important nutritional corrections I discuss with any senior patient who comes to me concerned about declining strength. The mistake is eating too few calories overall, specifically the chronic mild caloric restriction that many seniors fall into, either deliberately as a weight management strategy or inadvertently as appetite naturally decreases with age. Here is the biology. Your body requires a minimum caloric environment to support the energetically expensive process of muscle protein synthesis, which is simply the building and repair of muscle tissue. When total caloric intake falls below what your body requires for its basic metabolic functions, your metabolism implements a hierarchy of priorities. Brain function, immune activity, cardiac function, and thermoregulation are protected first. Muscle protein synthesis, being metabolically expensive and non-urgent in the short term, is deprioritized. Your body essentially makes the decision that building and maintaining muscle tissue is a luxury it cannot afford when total energy is scarce. Research from the University of Alabama found that even mild caloric deficits of 300 to 400 calories per day below maintenance requirements suppressed muscle protein synthesis rates in adults over 65 by 27%, compared to adequate caloric intake. even when total protein intake remained identical. For adults over 60, this suppression of muscle protein synthesis from caloric insufficiency is compounded by a phenomenon called anabolic resistance, which means your aging muscles are already less efficient at building and maintaining tissue compared to younger muscles. They require more protein, more calories, and more precise nutritional conditions to mount the same muscle protein synthesis response. Mild caloric restriction in a young person represents a modest inconvenience for muscle metabolism. In an adult over 70, it can be the difference between net muscle gain and net muscle loss from an identical protein intake. The insidious aspect of this mistake is that the appetite reduction that naturally accompanies aging is biological rather than volitional, driven by changes in ghrelin production, which is your hunger hormone, and by reduced gastric stretch receptor sensitivity. Research from Tufts University found that adults over 65 spontaneously consumed an average of 25% fewer calories than they required for muscle maintenance without consciously deciding to diet. They simply were not hungry enough to eat adequately. The practical correction requires moving from appetite-driven eating to schedule-riven eating, meaning consuming meals at fixed times regardless of hunger signals, with a specific focus on caloric density from whole food sources. Add healthy caloric density to each meal through avocado, olive oil drizzled over vegetables, whole eggs, nuts, and full-fat dairy, rather than increasing meal volume, which aging appetites resist. The synergy tip is to consume your highest calorie, highest protein meal in the morning rather than the evening, because research from Purdue University found that the anabolic hormone environment, meaning testosterone and growth hormone responsiveness, is most favorable in the morning hours, and calories consumed in this window are more efficiently directed toward muscle protein synthesis than the same calories consumed at dinner. All research references are in the description. Mistake number 4. This mistake is the one I previewed at the opening, the one that produces the long silence and the question about why nobody told them sooner. The mistake is following a deliberately low-fat or very low-fat diet in the belief that restricting dietary fat protects the heart, manages weight, and represents generally healthy eating for a senior. And the specific mechanism by which chronic fat restriction destroys muscle strength in adults over 60 involves your body's ability to produce the anabolic hormones that are the primary biological signal for muscle maintenance and growth. Let me be precise about the biology. Testosterone in men and women and growth hormone in both sexes are the two hormones most directly responsible for signaling your muscle cells to maintain their mass, repair damage, and resist the breakdown that age and inflammation promote. Both testosterone and growth hormone are synthesized from cholesterol through a biosynthetic pathway that requires dietary fat as its primary substrate. When you chronically restrict dietary fat, particularly the saturated and monounsaturated fats found in whole food sources like eggs, full-fat dairy, meat, and olive oil, you reduce the availability of the cholesterol precursor that your endocrine system requires to produce adequate amounts of these muscle-preserving hormones. Research from Pennsylvania State University followed men over 65 through an 8-week controlled dietary fat restriction protocol and found that reducing fat intake from 40% to 20% of total calories produced a measurable decline in free testosterone levels within 4 weeks, with the suppression continuing through the full 8-week period. The researchers found a direct and linear relationship between dietary fat intake and free testosterone across the study population, meaning the more severely fat was restricted, the greater the testosterone suppression. For women, research from the University of California, San Diego found that postmenopausal women consuming low-fat diets had significantly lower levels of both testosterone and IGF-1, which stands for insulin-like growth factor 1, and is the other primary anabolic signal for muscle tissue compared to women consuming moderate fat diets, even when total protein intake was equivalent. The downstream consequence for strength is not subtle. Research from Washington University in St. Louis found that men over 65 in the lowest quartile for free testosterone had leg press strength measurements 31% lower than those in the highest quartile, and that women with the lowest IGF-1 levels showed grip strength scores 24% below age, matched peers with adequate IGF-1. These are enormous differences in functional strength, and a significant proportion of them are driven by dietary fat restriction that is removing the hormonal substrate for muscle maintenance. You can eat perfect protein, exercise faithfully, and take every supplement recommended. But if you have chronically suppressed your anabolic hormone production through fat restriction, your muscles are operating with their most important maintenance signals turned down. The practical correction is to ensure that 30 to 40% of your daily calories come from whole food fats, specifically olive oil, avocados, whole eggs, full-fat Greek yogurt, fatty fish, and modest amounts of whole dairy. This is not a license for unlimited processed food or fried food. It is a specific prescription for the whole food fats that support hormone production and the fats soluble vitamin absorption, particularly vitamins D, K, and E, that your muscle biology depends on. The synergy tip is to consume your dietary fat alongside a zinc-rich food at each meal because zinc is the essential mineral coactor for testosterone synthesis. And research from the University of Rochester found that zinc deficiency, affecting approximately 35% of adults over 65, blunts the testosterone-producing response to adequate dietary fat intake. Brazil nuts, pumpkin seeds, and lean beef are excellent zinc sources to add alongside your fat-containing meals. I want to tell you about a patient I will call Constance, a 74-year-old retired pharmacist from Denver, Colorado. Constance had followed a meticulously low-fat diet for 22 years, motivated by excellent intentions and the dietary guidelines of her era. She exercised regularly, maintained a healthy weight by conventional standards, and could not understand why her strength was declining year by year, despite doing everything she had been told was right. When I assessed her hormone panel, her free testosterone and IGF-1 were both in the lowest 5th percentile for her age group. Her vitamin D was critically low despite taking supplements because without fat in her meals, the fat-soluble vitamin D had nowhere to absorb. When I explained the mechanism and transitioned her to a Mediterranean pattern diet with adequate whole food fats, Constance was initially anxious but scientifically engaged. At 6 months, her hormone levels had measurably improved. Her vitamin D had normalized, and her physical therapist documented strength gains in her lower body that had not occurred in the preceding 3 years of the same exercise routine. The exercise had not changed. The fat had right here. Here I want to pause and be direct with you. If this video is giving you the kind of information that your medical appointments have not provided, please hit the subscribe button right now and give this video a like. This channel exists specifically to bridge the gap between what the research on aging says and what seniors are actually being told. And every subscription helps this content reach more people who are losing strength unnecessarily because nobody has explained the real reasons. Thank you. Let us continue. Mistake number 3. This mistake is one of the most widespread in the senior population and one of the most counterintuitive to correct because it feels like an act of self-discipline and health consciousness, when in reality it is silently dismantling the most important nutritional strategy for muscle maintenance available to an aging body. The mistake is skipping or minimizing breakfast, which many seniors do either because they are not hungry in the morning, because they have adopted intermittent fasting protocols designed for younger metabolisms, or because they believe lighter morning eating is better for digestion or weight management. Here's why this is such a specifically devastating mistake for muscle strength after 60. In the early morning hours, your cortisol levels, which is your body's primary stress hormone, reach their daily maximum. Cortisol is catabolic, meaning it promotes the breakdown of tissue, including muscle protein, to provide glucose for your brain and organs during the transition from overnight fasting to daytime activity. In a young adult, this morning cortisol spike is efficiently countered by the simultaneous morning elevation of anabolic hormones that preserves muscle tissue from breakdown. Research from the University of Chicago found that in adults over 65, this protective anabolic hormone response to the morning cortisol spike is significantly blunted compared to younger adults, leaving the catabolic effect of cortisol relatively unopposed during the morning hours. The only nutritional tool that directly counters morning cortisol-driven muscle breakdown is protein at breakfast. Specifically, a protein dose large enough to provide adequate leucine, the amino acid that directly activates the mTOR pathway, which is the master switch for muscle protein synthesis inside your muscle cells. Research from Purdue University analyzed the dietary records of over 2,000 adults over 60 and found that the average senior consumed only 11 g of protein at breakfast, dramatically below the 30 to 35 gram that research from the University of Texas Medical Branch established as the minimum threshold to trigger a meaningful muscle protein synthesis response in aging muscle tissue experiencing anabolic resistance. 11 grams versus 35. The morning protein deficit alone explains a significant portion of the strength decline that seniors experience despite eating adequate total daily protein. And there is an additional dimension to the breakfast mistake that most people have never heard. Research from Big Gum and Women's Hospital found that protein consumed beyond approximately 40 grams in a single meal does not produce additional muscle protein synthesis. Your muscle cells can only process a limited amount of protein stimulus at once, and excess protein is simply oxidized or stored. This means that skipping breakfast and eating a large protein dinner to compensate does not work. You cannot bank muscle protein synthesis from morning to evening the way you can bank calories. Every meal without adequate protein is a missed muscle building opportunity that dinner cannot retroactively fill. The practical correction is to build every breakfast around a protein anchor of 30 to 35 grams consumed within 30 minutes of waking to intercept the cortisol-driven muscle breakdown window at its earliest and most damaging point. 3 scrambled eggs provide 19 g, bringing you to 30 to 35 grind when combined with a cup of Greek yogurt at 17 g or cottage cheese or a protein smoothie with whey protein as the base. The synergy tip is to add a tablespoon of ground flaxseed to your morning protein meal because flaxseed's linin content reduces the inflammatory cytokine production that morning cortisol triggers in muscle tissue, creating a double protection against morning muscle breakdown through both the protein-mediated anabolic stimulus and the anti-inflammatory lignan-mediated cortisol response suppression. Research from the University of Copenhagen found this combination produced a greater reduction in morning muscle protein catabolism markers than protein alone. Number 2, this mistake is one that seems so obviously wrong when I explain the mechanism that patients frequently ask me why this information is not on the front page of every senior health publication in the country. The reason I believe is that correcting it does not require purchasing anything from any manufacturer, does not create a billable medical service, and does not generate pharmaceutical revenue. The mistake is failing to eat protein within 30 to 45 minutes after any form of physical activity, including walking. And the consequence for aging muscle tissue of missing this post-activity protein window is that the exercise you are doing is providing the stimulus for muscle growth, but your muscles are receiving none of the raw materials needed to respond to that stimulus. Here's the physiology. When you engage in any physical activity that places mechanical demand on your muscles, from a brisk walk to a resistance training session, your muscle cells respond by upregulating the expression of amino acid transporters on their surfaces and activating the mTOR pathway, creating a window of heightened receptivity to incoming amino acids, during which muscle protein synthesis can occur at rates significantly higher than at rest. Research from McMaster University found that this post-exercise anabolic window, during which muscle cells are maximally receptive to protein-derived amino acids, is most pronounced in the first 30 to 60 minutes following activity and then begins to close progressively over the following 2 hours. Miss that window and the muscle cells that were primed and ready to build and repair receive no substrate. The anabolic window closes, and the exercise stimulus produces dramatically less muscle benefit than the same exercise with correctly timed protein would have provided. For adults over 60, missing this window is not simply a missed optimization. Research from the University of Texas Medical Branch found that older adults who consumed protein more than 2 hours after resistance exercise showed no measurable increase in muscle protein synthesis compared to a resting control group, while those who consumed the same protein within 30 minutes showed a 47% increase. The same stimulus, the same protein, a completely different result based solely on timing. 47% greater muscle protein synthesis from timing alone. For aging muscles already fighting anabolic resistance, missing the post-exercise protein window is the nutritional equivalent of planting seeds without watering them. The practical correction is to prepare your post-activity protein source before you exercise so that it is ready the moment you return. A container of Greek yogurt with a tablespoon of grated Parmesan for leucine boosting, a protein smoothie prepared in advance, or 2 hard-boiled eggs with a small serving of cottage cheese all provide adequate protein in a form that is convenient and requires no preparation time when you return from activity. The dose should be 25 to 35 g of protein with a minimum of 3 g of leucine to clear the mTOR activation threshold in aging muscle. The synergy tip is to consume a small amount of fast-digesting carbohydrate alongside your post-exercise protein, specifically a banana or a tablespoon of honey. Because the insulin response triggered by carbohydrates enhances amino acid uptake into muscle cells by activating the same insulin-sensitive amino acid transporters that exercise has already primed, amplifying the total amino acid delivery to your muscles during the critical post-exercise window. Research from the University of Birmingham found that protein plus carbohydrate post-exercise produced 35% greater muscle glycogen restoration and measurably greater muscle protein synthesis than protein alone in adults over 65. I treated a patient I will call Leonard, an 80-year-old retired surgeon from Boston, Massachusetts. Leonard was a rigorously disciplined man who walked 45 minutes every morning without fail and consumed what he had calculated to be adequate daily protein. Yet his strength had declined steadily for 3 years, and he was genuinely puzzled by the disconnect. When I reviewed his actual eating pattern in detail, the missing piece was immediately clear. He walked at 7 a.m. and ate breakfast at 9 a.m., typically a modest meal of oatmeal and fruit with minimal protein. Because truly understanding this chain reaction may be the strongest push toward change that I can give you. When your muscle cells stop receiving regular mechanical overload, meaning they are no longer being challenged or pushed beyond their usual capacity, a biological process known as disuse atrophy begins to activate, and it can start in just a matter of days. Disuse atrophy is not simply about muscles getting smaller or weaker on the surface. It is actually a highly organized and deliberate cellular response, where your body essentially reassesses muscle tissue as energy-costly infrastructure that is no longer being used efficiently. As a result, it begins breaking it down piece by piece, recycling valuable proteins and redirecting those resources toward other areas it considers more essential for survival. This is not random deterioration, it is a strategic internal shift. Evidence from research conducted at the University of Nottingham highlights just how quickly this can happen, especially in adults over the age of 65. In their findings, just 2 weeks of reduced activity, not complete inactivity, but simply doing less than usual, led to a measurable 3.9% decrease in leg muscle mass. Even more concerning, maximal leg strength dropped by 14%, and the rate of muscle protein synthesis, which is critical for maintaining and rebuilding muscle, declined by a striking 25%. This means the body not only loses muscle, but also becomes significantly less capable of rebuilding it at the same time. And the most alarming part is the timeline. This is not something that unfolds over years. It happens rapidly, within just 14 days of reduced movement, showing how sensitive and responsive the body is to changes in physical demand.